But yes, I actually found this evening that like an arse, I double booked myself. I was booked to do this podcast and also to do another one with our mutual friend Kit and also my friend Tom.
Shit!
Yeah, we were going to do Midnight Mass. Flanagan's new series from Netflix. We were going to do that.
Yeah.
We, once Kit and I had finished it, we knew we had to get Tom on because it's going to have a resonance for him that it just doesn't for us. Mm-hmm. It's going to have an entirely other spectrum, and I just had to know what he thought of it, because Tom is incredible. He's an amazing guy. I've never met anyone in my life who knows more about horror media and fiction ever. And that includes my mother, who is like the font of all knowledge in this regard. I mean, literally, she is. When it comes to horror trivia, were there a Trivial Pursuit game that was based entirely on horror, there would be no point in playing it. You would just declare her the winner.
Well, why have we got you and not Mum then?
It's a fair point. Right? Yeah, it's a fair point. Yeah, I know, right? Why would you go to the Monkey when you can get the organ grinder? Yeah, I know. But yes, I knew we had to talk to him about it because he's not only does he have the horror angle, he also has the faith angle as well. It would be so interesting. But no, Tom is an amazing chap. He really is. I met him through two of my friends who are, like myself, two homosexual gentlemen who are married. And Tom, before COVID, Tom was part of our little gaming group. So we would get together once in a while and play video games and play Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. And then Tom and I would chat about Warhammer and H.P. Lovecraft. And it's the most amazing setup. You have an Anglican vicar and three gay guys, all of whom are sort of varying shades of atheist agnostic, talking about horror and playing horror video games.
It might be interesting. Not that I wish to suggest which avenues and rabbit holes we travel down, but I think there could be a sort of interesting scope to maybe touch on that with Legion. There's certain things about Legion definitely. That I think for a proper bit of sort of like popcorn flick, it at least touches in and it makes some nice suggestions and implications. So
it does. And now that I thought about it, and I'm sure I may have actually spoken to Tom about Legion before, because he definitely knows a lot about The Exorcist and knows a lot about exorcism and its rites and whatnot.
Oh wow!
Well, he's educated. He's trained in whatever the Anglican rites and rituals are on exorcism, and he's actually had to investigate not many but a few claims and cases. There are not many. There are like a maximum of 3 across the entire country per year, in Anglican faith circles. And he's always said to me, we did ask him, have you ever encountered anything that sort of convinced you that there was something supernatural? And his answer has always been no.
That's a very Anglican response.
I love the idea of an Anglican exorcism.
Oh yeah,
come out of this child and have some tea and a nice bit of cake.
Right.
I just sort of imagine John Lemessurier doing it. Would you mind awfully, Pazuzu?
Would you mind? Yes, it would be very
just sort of lining up out here.
It's not really very nice, is it? If you think about it, what you're doing.
Yeah, they'd be sat beside Reagan's bed, like wringing their hands, wouldn't they? Which, this is terribly, awfully inconvenient. Would you mind? Yes, just moving.
There's a marble cake here and everything.
That said, I've had this conversation with so many people at this.
I'm here trying to sort this out, and I have got a fete to organise. You should come. We've got a tombola. It's going to be wonderful.
But what I love about Tom is he's very candid about the whole thing, very candid indeed. I mean, he's kind of, he wears his heart on his sleeve, and he is he's a man of faith. Obviously, he wouldn't be in the position if he weren't, but he does understand like the foibles of his position and of the Anglican Church itself. But we've had some fascinating conversations about
Oh
like
my God,
the
I'm going to spend the rest of the night thinking of an Anglican version of The Exorcist. It's wonderful, and why has no one done it?
it wouldn't be that dramatic, would it?
Transpose it to a sleepy English village, sort of maybe in early 1960s or something.
Yeah, and the child would mysteriously be called Thatcher as well. I don't know why. But...
wouldn't have the power of Christ compels you moment, and if it did, it just wouldn't be that powerful, would it?
No, but it would be a very kind of low rent British film of a certain post Ealing kind of vibe.
Who else would you get to play? Like, it would have to be
Wilfred
someone.
Hyde White would be Max von Sydow.
Right. Yeah, it couldn't be Max von Sydow because he's too powerful, isn't
Yeah,
he?
it has to be Wilfred Hyde White, or if they're really cashing in, they get Alec Guinness in. And...
yeah, just doing Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yeah.
I mean, Hayley Mills would be Reagan.
Oh, it'd just be terribly, terribly polite and dull, wouldn't it?
Karras would be like Alan Bates or something, wouldn't it?
That said, I mean, I know it's a joke, but I've had this I've actually written a film script based on this that some friends of mine are looking at producing. Where,
wow,
why do people not talk to these demons, these possessing entities? I mean, these entities, look at the Pazuzu in the original Exorcist, it's intelligent, right?
Well,
it knows so much about the universe and about reality. This thing knows like the secret metaphysics of all being. So why once Karras establishes that, yeah, it's a demon, it's actually this entity, why isn't he sitting down and saying to it, look, this is really interesting. Right, you are obviously a very old, very intelligent entity. What's going on?
Between the vomiting.
Why all this? Why? What is this? The war? Why are you? What for one thing? Why are you possessing a little girl?
And interesting. Yeah. The only thing that comes out of the quite bizarrely awful second installment is
I rewatched that.
Where they do try to justify the plot of the first one. This kind of evil finds a way in with something especially good, or that especially innocent. And I thought, well, at least there's an attempt here to try and grapple with.
So it's going for the whole childhood innocence.
Of course, yeah.
But then she was the good grasshopper. She was the one that would calm all the others.
But considering we've had so many, we talked about in so many previous episodes about the uncanny children thing, which obviously this still is. It at least pushes back a wee bit at that all kids are innately evil.
Right.
The second film is really frustrating because it is bad. It's terrible. It's a terrible film.
It's so awful.
There is a lot of potential there. Like there's this one bit when Reagan and the priest Father Lamont go back to the house in Georgetown, and he's sort of knocked sideways by this vision of a cloud of locusts or something, and he's just sitting on the floor, and she goes to him and she can't get him to stand up, and she stands up and looks at like the closed door of the bedroom from the first film where it all happened, and she just starts. I mean, look, with all due respect in the world, Linda Blair, not a particularly great actress. And she doesn't, I mean, she's still very young anyway in the second one. But she doesn't do a good job. And they try to hang an entire film on this girl and it doesn't work at all. But in that moment, when she sort of stands up, and she has this look on her face like, right, I've got to do this and I'm on my own. And she starts walking towards the door and it doesn't do anything. They don't go anywhere with it, But there's just this moment there where I'm watching it and I'm thinking, now there's an interesting idea for a film, because the girl is so passive in the first film. She's completely just knocked about by these forces that are outside herself, adults, demons, priests, whatever. She has no agency whatsoever in the first movie. She's a total victim. So like the idea of the second movie where Reagan's a bit older, she's supposed to be like 16 or something, and she's becoming a woman and she's trying to deal with what's happening. There's a really great idea there. That could have been a really interesting thing to do.
Absolutely. Giving her
ironically the second film is brought down by the fact that it's got so many balls in the air. It's just trying to think about so many things at once.
Weirdness going on. It's like it's surreal at times, isn't it? It is absolutely
those are the best bits.
Surreal.
Yeah, the surreal sequences with like the locusts and shit.
Yeah, once you get someone like Boorman on, I mean, Boorman's one of those people his films are so batshit. They either just find a certain alchemy in the edits, and they sort of pull together, or they really don't.
They're
But I
falling
think,
apart.
I think the thing that for poor Linda Blair, I will, give her some credit, is I don't think there's an actor in the world or throughout history that can deliver the line, "Well, I was possessed, but I'm all right."
To be fair to her, she actually does pretty well with that particular line, because she does it throwaway like it's a joke, which is absolutely the only way you can play it.
way you can do it. It's
How else are you
exactly
gonna
the only
play
way
it?
you can do it. Yeah. It's interesting actually, because I think with Legion, I mean, again, that there is a sense that Legion is teetering on being incredibly messy as a film.
Yeah.
But obviously we have The Heretic, which kind of makes anything that comes after it seem sculpted.
Well, I mean, the thing that always gets me about Legion, and has always got me about Legion, is just how competent it is. It has no right to be. It is it's the second sequel in a popular horror franchise from an era when a lot of these films went straight to video. I'm sure this one did have a cinematic release, but it was a very limited cinematic release. It shouldn't be as coherent as it is. It shouldn't be as good as it is.
I agree with you. There's certain things about this film that betray that it is not only a debut by a director. Did he direct the ninth? Call it, or would he already directed? Okay.
Yeah.
But I actually rather enjoy its bombast. I like how it sort of pushes against notions of good taste, because it already knows, well, this is one of those sort of projects where you're going to have to come the whole way down the line with this, guys, or not bother.
It's such a strange mix of things, isn't it? Like a strange sort of mixture of elements. I mean, you have an almost detective noir thing going on with the Kinderman character.
It's kind of a police procedural serial killer film.
Yeah, which is cool. I'm all over that. I like those sorts of things when they're done well. You've got George C. Scott, of course, returning, and he is like 10 years on from the last film that we discussed, and looking exactly the same. Exactly the same.
The film is actually pitiless. It goes right up into his face, and it shows you that he is an old man by this point. And it doesn't have any any qualms about getting right up in there and showing you his big old man face.
Well, this is
one of the things
great. I like that.
It is another weirdness of this film, to be honest. The stylistic choices are very strange. Like, it makes very domestic settings look rather gothic. So the hospital, for one, looks gothic all the time, regardless of where you are in it. It's shot as though it's like Dracula's castle.
It's funny that, because I would probably have said the opposite. I would have said that the film has a lovely messy quotidian realism about the way it depicts ordinary spaces, like the Kinderman home and the
the home,
the nurse's station with joke posters up and pencil sharpeners all over the place and ashtrays and things. I would have said the opposite. I would have said that it has a very determined naturalism about it. That I really like. There's a certain almost documentary feel to parts of it.
Well, one of the things it does with that is when you have these wonderful sort of wide shots of places like the nurse's station and whatnot, is of course it introduces supernatural elements. So one of the classic sequences is the old lady skittering around on the ceiling like a spider,
great.
while everywhere all of the domestic stuff is going on underneath, and it doesn't make a muchness of it. What I love is there's no camera movement in that sequence. It just, and nobody registers it. There's no orchestra sting or anything like that. It just shows you it happening.
No, I love that. It's one of the several indelible images that this film has. I saw this first pretty soon after it would have been released. I rented the VHS, in the classic way from the local shop, which had VHS boxes in a stand.
I'm imagining that's how most people listening to this will have seen this first. It is it's almost like the classic video rental film.
And I suppose I would have been about 15 or 16. And I mean, certain images, like the moment where Kinderman's daughter almost gets her head snipped off, and the woman crawling around on the ceiling, and the white figure that suddenly bursts out of nowhere with the scissors.
Sequence,
they're just indelible. You know, they really stuck with me.
There are moments of absolute genius in this film that are just stunning. The timing is wonderful. That jump scare, the timing is sublime.
It's brilliant, because it keeps you
sublime.
It keeps you going for ages. It keeps you, because you know something's coming, but it keeps you going until you start to relax, and then
the silence, the camera is still, and the timing doesn't work. That's what makes it supernatural. The timing doesn't work. There's no time for any natural figure to materialize behind the nurse after she's come out of that room. It's really distressing and brilliantly done.
And I just love the I love the image, the white figure in these sort of robes, which I suppose are actually probably like hospital sheets or something. But it's just great. This figure, you see it for a split second, so it makes this very sudden passing impression on you, and you come away thinking you've seen, as always with these things when they're done well, you come away feeling like you've seen more than you have.
Something
scarier than you've actually seen.
It has a similar effect to me of the fleeting glimpses of pipes in Ghostwatch. Where it's more an impression than an image.
It's that cinema verite thing that when it's used at its absolute best, which is the intercutting between moments of action with an insert that doesn't actually it leaves an impression that something worse has happened. Of course, we've got the statue minus its head, but then people, unless they specifically remember the sequence of events, which obviously doesn't happen unless you replay a videotape, or they think something else was, and there's many examples of this where obviously directors do this on purpose, and it's almost like a Mandela effect, you know. Where
it's the classic psycho shower scene.
It's only a little, but like you, Jack, I had a similar first encounter with this, and in fact, it came out of a kind of a tacit agreement with my parents, because I went through a phase, I guess, like a lot of boys in their early teens, and where I was fascinated by apocryphal stories of The Exorcist and its original release, and particularly because it was at a point where just anecdotally, I still had a generation of family existing who were not necessarily all religious, but the film rocked them. The knowledge of the film rocked them, and they didn't, But my uncle, who was wonderfully sort of lurid and a sort of family grotesque in his own right, delighted in sitting me down one day, telling me all about it and all the terrible things that happened in the film, and I became fascinated with it. And I would find little articles and things, and and I was like, what's it about? And I would sort of try and find out things about it. And then in my sort of I guess early teens as well, I had a sort of agreement with my I think my dad or something said, look, the third film is out. I hadn't seen the second. I certainly hadn't seen the first. It hadn't even come back into the theaters, I think, until the sort of later 90s. And it was, if you watch it, well, you can watch this, and then maybe we could put it to bed for a bit, because I was getting a bit monomaniacal about it. And so that was my first encounter, was a VHS as well, where it was that, that had to slake, if you like, this obsession that I had sort of around 13 years of age with this film that had been,
so The Exorcist had a kind of mythic quality.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember seeing it in the cinema when it was re-released, and unfortunately it was, I think French and Saunders already parodied at that point, and I remember watching it going, oh.
That exact thing. I mean, it's
better as a myth.
I said earlier that my mother is sort of like the font of all knowledge on horror, and she is, and she had the infamous VHS collection when I was young, but the one she didn't have and wouldn't have was The Exorcist, not because of any religious reason, but because she was caught up in the swell and the hysteria of it when it was originally released. She saw it at the cinema and was properly affected by it. Like, really,
my mother was told. I
mean,
my mother was it 73 it came out?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, well, my mother was 17 in 73, and I mean, it was the year she married my father. And I mean, it's so young, isn't it? And they're still married. But I remember, so she was a married woman, albeit a very young married woman. And her mother banned her from watching it. She said, "You're not going." And of course, it was my mother listened as well. It was like my grandmother hath spoken. And yes, so my mother never saw it. She still has never seen it. So I've sort of filled her in on it. And she's like, "I've never seen it." Well, I was told I couldn't see it. I said, "You were married. You were living out of home." Well, what did my dad say? Well, he obeyed as well.
I love it to bits.
Such a different, different discourse for a different generation, and you suddenly realize how it only takes
even
one
with
generation
that,
or two generations, and so much.
Even with that post-60s generation,
yes,
still,
because there's always a drag, isn't it?
There is, cultural drag factor. Yeah, I also saw 3 before having seen either of the others.
Yeah, likewise.
And I was maybe not quite as fascinated by the idea of the first one as you, Elliot, but I was definitely, I was definitely very curious about it, but of course, it wasn't being shown on television, and there weren't VHSs, so even if I'd wanted to gird my loins and gather my courage and watch it, I didn't have the opportunity. But I saw it quite soon after I saw number 3, because I remember there was a guy I was at college with who was kind of an older guy, because some of my courses had older students on them, and I say an older guy. He was an older guy to me at the time. He was probably like 26, but we got to talking about movies.
Dead.
Yeah, exactly. And we got to talking about
in gay terms, it's even worse. I'm telling you, basically ancient at that point.
Well, the only arena in which it's worse than that is in maths, isn't it?
Gosh, yeah. After 21.
But no, I remember I had this conversation with this guy, and funnily enough, I think the thing that got us talking about movies was John Borman's Excalibur, because I was obsessed with that movie at the time, and so was this guy, and we got talking about movies, and I got talking about movies that I wanted to see but couldn't because they were either banned or whatever, and we got onto A Clockwork Orange and The Exorcist, and he said, "Oh well, I can help you out with that," and like the next day he turned up and he had bootleg VHSs in his bag, so I got to see them both. Yeah.
Oh,
and
fantastic.
I found The Exorcist quite effective at the time, and then I gave him his tape back, and years later it got its re-release, and I went to see it at the cinema, and I can't remember, because it's a good few years ago now, if the re-release was the theatrical version or whether they cinematically released the so-called director's cut with the spider and all that. But either way, I went to see it at the movies, and the second time I saw it in the cinema, I remember thinking, I understand why this had a lot of effect on me first time I watched it, and I certainly understand why it had a lot of effect on a lot of people when it was originally shown. Yeah. But you can really see the holes the second time round, I think. I still think it's a well-made film, an effective film. I think it's probably quite an immoral film, actually, to be honest.
Yes, I know what you mean. Actually, yeah.
I mean, I don't say that in a sort of it should be banned sort of way, because I don't think that way.
Right.
But just in terms of my worldview, I mean, firstly, just on the basic question of whether or not it's actually acceptable to get a 12-year-old girl to do some of the stuff that she's asked to do, I kind of just don't think it is, Right. And more than that, it is basically just propaganda for a worldview that not only do I not share it, but it's actively dangerous. Like you shouldn't be propagating the idea that treating symptoms like that, the right way to treat them is through exorcism rituals.
It's very like that awful film that came many decades later, which was the Exorcism of Emily Rose.
That's worse.
That is vile. That is actively vile. I actually won't watch that film because I know a lot about the actual case where the priest actively stopped the child from taking their antipsychotics, and but the film lionizes the priest.
Well,
And
the thing
like,
about the thing about The Exorcist is that it has a very definite worldview. I mean, one of the problems that I have with it is that there's really no ambiguity in it. It has a very definite idea of what is happening, and it essentially just tells you what is happening and what isn't happening. And what is happening, quote unquote, is just completely in line with this very orthodox, essentially medieval form of Catholic dogma.
Yes.
And it's putting forward, therefore, implicitly the idea that the thing to do when you're confronted by this sort of behavior in a child is to get priests involved and get them to perform a ritual. And unfortunately, the thing you should probably be looking at more at things like schizophrenia and possible child abuse, etc., etc. But the thing is, the thing about the exorcism of Emily Rose is that it's worse precisely because it pretends to be questioning and ambiguous.
Yeah.
It has this thing all the way through where it kind of says, well, you could look at it this way or you could look at it that way, and it pretends to not. The Exorcist is actually preferable in the end because it's open about the fact that it has a worldview that it is propagandizing.
There's still one thing about I think that just about comes through in The Exorcist, which is just I guess just a little beat of dramatic irony, which I rather like, which is when Reagan's mother is desperately trying to elicit the help of priests, and they're all like, no, this doesn't happen anymore. And actually they're the ones that take the convincing. But I mean, it's a little wrinkle, and it doesn't really, it's not a big beat, but it's kind of amusing at the time. But no, I do absolutely buy what you're saying. The other thing I find quite funny, just from a production point of view rather, is that Max von Sydow, who by that point was a stalwart, of course, although he's aged, he was really just in his 40s, but he'd had already a long career with all his films of Bergman and everything, and he's an old school actor as well. He's an old, and he said, I broke what for me is a cardinal rule of being in a rehearsal on the stage or in a take on a movie. So I know it's something that it's not a big deal, he said, but I'm from a different era. I'm from a different way of being trained in that. I'm from Sweden, for God's sake. We do it differently there. And said Linda Blair gave one of her line readings, and I had to. Can we cut? He said, I just couldn't. I needed a moment. I just thought, I'm not there. I'm not there. I've just met this young girl,
and he never really resolved
to break a take if you're an actor. I mean, everyone does it now, but then if you were from his. To actually say cut instead of the director was like the cardinal, like the useful Catholic terminology as well. But it was the cardinal sin. It was the original sin. It's the original sin of it.
Was this because of the language that was being used?
He was like, oh my! He was just because of her conviction,
right?
And because of her, she just did it. Sort of expected it maybe to come through in a slightly self-conscious way, and maybe it'd be something that was sorted in the dub or through the edit. He said, but no, she just went for it. He said, quite took the wind out of his sails. And he was like, I'm sorry, I've tried. I don't know my next line, and can we just have a moment?
I love the idea of this sort of genteel Swede being shocked by the idea of a 12-year-old knowing a rude word.
Right.
He never really got over that ambivalence about it, did he? Because he did come back for the second film, but he took a hell of a lot of persuading. He was never really comfortable with it, even after it was released.
When you think of the films that he did with Bergman, which are very serious about Catholicism as well, it's perhaps not surprising. But the other thing, because I know I'll forget it because obviously we'll move on to talk about Legion rather than The Exorcist, is if you ever find the chance to get a hold of Christopher Lee's reading of the audiobook of The Exorcist, it is quite the most magnificent thing I've ever heard. It is better than the film. If only Lee is absolutely an octogenarian, I do not give a fuck stage. And it is just absolutely golden because he does it in that Lee way, which is, of course, so earnest.
Yeah.
And it's incredible. It's incredible. If only for the it's burning me sequence. Having Lee do that is just something else.
I have to listen to this. I mean, so he recorded this quite late on, yeah?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, certainly.
Right,
I think he was in the 70s or 80s. You know, when
Right, so I wonder if this was before or after he'd started recording really, really bad, like, European heavy metal.
heavy metal albums. Oh, I love it, because the thing I love about Lee is he manages to get himself in these he's not with us anymore, rather odd, absurd situations. But I've met people who met him when he was alive, and they said it was so incongruous because he was very serious. Everything serious, and I said, but it's really the only time he really let go was with these little forays he used to take with Peter Cushing into the West End to watch the Looney Tunes.
Yes, there's an interview. There is a filmed discussion between the two of them very late on when Peter Cushing is towards the end of his life, and they're talking about it is the best thing in the world. They're talking about phoning one another
disarms him all the time, because he would answer the phone and say, "Lee here, what is it?" He would. And Cushing would go, what's up, Doc? And then they would speak to each other as Daffy. But he said Lee would be holding himself with laughter.
I just can't.
God, I need a time machine now so I can go back. And
this is exactly what they talk about in this discussion between themselves. Phoning one another up and pretending to be Looney Tunes characters. I can't.
It's like Peter Cushing is the only man who ever existed who could just disarm Christopher Lee,
right,
and just make him, embrace the absurd.
Mind you, that said, having watched interviews with Cushing, I get the impression he could have disarmed anyone.
He's just
so charming,
so magnificently charming, isn't he?
I think
the only one
merciless ray of niceness at you.
Yes. He's almost like the opposite, the contrast to Lee in that regard, isn't he? I mean, if you look up the word stentorian in the dictionary, it could have a
and Lee. I mean, let's face it. I mean, I love Christopher Lee, but let's face it, the guy was a reactionary Tory tax exile.
Absolutely. He was old nobility, wasn't he? He's from that stable,
held as a baby by the assassins of Rasputin. I mean, it's just insane.
The insanity of his life, stuff that he's actually done.
Yeah. Like he's one of those people who's always there at the time, It's like you get those people. I mean, I encountered that in a different way when I worked with Annika Wills over 4 years, an actress I worked with, George, who Jack knows, and a similar sort of thing. Just someone who always seemed to be at moments of either history or pop culture history within her own lifetime, and it's quite uncanny when you did that, you would.
There's just a strange charm, isn't there?
And Lee, exactly. I mean, Lee, I love the idea that Lee was in. Well, I don't love it in the sense that I condone it, but I love it in the sense that it is just such a bizarre, romantic notion of Lee sort of running, Secret Service operations during the war with Ian Fleming, and their runner is John Pertwee.
Yeah. It's absolutely insane. He knew everybody. He met Tolkien, he met Mervyn Peake, and was in productions of both of their works later on. It's madness, isn't it? I mean, I was watching. I love Gormenghast. I love Mervyn Peake's Gormenghast, and I was watching a documentary about the making of the BBC production, which Christopher Lee was in as Flay, of course.
Yeah, he's the butler, isn't he?
Yeah, that's right. He was saying, I knew him. My sister knew him more than I did, of course. Very, very quiet man. Just like, what the fuck? You knew Tolkien and you knew fucking hell. This is madness.
It's odd for someone who had this. It's incredibly. He's of noble extraction, and yet there is a part of me that just feels slightly sorry for him when he has the talk about Lord of the Rings with Peter Jackson.
Yeah.
Well, of course I'll be giving my Gandalf. No, we can't insure you for that.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
you're too old to play Gandalf. Oh.
Besides, I'm sorry, but you're Christopher Lee. I mean, come on.
Yeah, you can't be Gandalf. I'm really sorry. You cannot.
Sorry, darling. We're all typecast to some degree.
Yeah, but he is a magnet. I mean, I love one of the things I love about the Lord of the Rings movies is that he finally looks like Dracula as described in the book.
Yes.
When he plays Saruman, he actually looks like Dracula as he appears in the early parts of the novel.
Right.
And indeed, how much? Now you'll like this. this is what we call a segue. How much Legion is really drawing on so many things from Dracula, particularly pertaining to Renfield and that was subtle as hell. Wasn't it?
That was very well done, I have to say. There is a segue here. There is a segue.
Even down
Brad
to
Dourif. Brad Dourif plays Grima Wormtongue, who is of course Saruman's aide. By the way, Brad Dourif's performances in this are actually very difficult to watch because of their intensity.
He's very good.
Kind of take your breath away whenever he's on screen. He's not on very much because, of course, it's doing that wonderful thing where it's intercutting between the actor who plays Damien Karras and Brad.
Well, he would have been on
Gemini
a lot less if it wasn't for the fact that Jason Miller was not well. I mean, he was experiencing wet brain at the time because of his alcoholism.
Right.
Well, this is one of the really interesting things, because I watched the theatrical cut for this and I got hold of the Blu-ray release, the recent Blu-ray release, which has the so-called director's cut on it, which is their best guess based on the surviving footage that they have. Some of it's lost, but based on that and based on Blatty's notes, etc., and based on the novel and etc., they've assembled what they've called the director's cut from the film as it stands and some of the extra footage left over. And the most interesting thing is, how in the theatrical cut the idea is that patient X is physically Damien Karras.
Yes.
Right? And he's physically Damien Karras, played by Jason Miller, who of course played Damien Karras in the first movie.
Yeah.
But he keeps on turning into, so to speak, Brad Dourif.
Yeah.
And the idea, at least the way I've always read it, is that although George C. Scott is still seeing Jason Miller, so to speak, because that's who is physically there, we, the audience, are seeing Brad Dourif, because Dourif
the Gemini killer,
is Venom, the Gemini killer.
That's how I've always read it too.
In the director's cut, it becomes clear that the original idea was that Brad Dourif is just playing Damien Karras, because there's shots in the scene where Kinderman and Dyer are in the restaurant. There's shots where they're talking about Damien, their old friend, and they're looking at framed photographs on the wall of like priests in the restaurant having dinners and so on. And there's a photograph of Brad Dourif in a priest's outfit, and they're looking at him and they're referring to our friend Damien. There's Damien. Right the way through the director's cut, Jason Miller's not in it. Right the way through the director's cut, he walks in for the very first time, Brad Dourif. The entire time he's talking to him, Brad Dourif, the entire time. He never switches back and forth between Brad Dourif and Jason Miller.
That takes away one of the most wonderful stylistic elements in this film. I love the way it switches between, and the way it kind of implies that he's not physically transforming into the Gemini killer, or it's not even that Kinderman is seeing the Gemini killer. It's almost like he's recognizing elements of the Gemini killer's mannerisms in Karras.
In the theatrical cut, it's pure cinema, because when it's Brad Dourif, that's just for us. That's just for the
it's to show you that this is
my interpretation.
This is the spirit that's talking, right? This is the personality that's talking.
And the interesting thing is the film, because Blatty is a cinema buff and he makes his characters cinema buffs, and they talk about old movies. Notably, they talk about It's a Wonderful Life. But in one scene, I don't know if they talk about it or if it's just there in a poster, but it's a poster, but it's very prominent. There's a poster for a film called Waiting for Mr. Jordan. Waiting for Mr. Jordan is a film about a man who dies. He goes to the afterlife, a sort of afterlife waiting room, and there a sort of angelic figure tells him, oops, there's been a clerical error, you died too soon, you can go back to the world, into the body of a guy who's scheduled to die. His soul will come here because he's scheduled to, but you can have the rest of your life that you were supposed to have in his body, right? And in the film, it follows his adventures in this guy's body, but you don't see him as his new body. You see him as himself all the way through.
Right. Very nice. Very nice sort of cinematic shorthand. I like that.
And it's good because you're already building on something. I mean, It's a Wonderful Life is almost used as a kind of schema. It's a sort of inversion of It's a Wonderful Life throughout the film as well. But that's a really interesting additional parallel there. And no, but that's certainly the way I've always interpreted it. And I think it also makes more sense, or certainly if not sense, then it creates a bigger impact with possibly one of the most frightening lines in the entire film, which is, he is in here with us, and he goes through this whole, and I think that's such such an effective line. It's
the way it's delivered as well. I mean, Dourif always goes for intensity in every role he's ever done. He's always so incredibly intense, and in this one it fits beautifully. He's crying with the intensity of the evil, the malevolence that this guy is feeling.
But it's a big problem because he's got long monologues to deliver. They're long. It's much worse. I mean, I went on Twitter and I said, I prefer the theatrical cut to the director's cut. And one of the reasons is that the theatrical cut has long stretches where it's just uninterrupted. Scott and Dourif in that room together, and Dourif is just talking and talking and talking, and he's just got this enormous monologue that he's got to deliver to the camera.
Right.
And I mean, I think it's a great performance, but he struggles with it, as any actor would, because where do you go with this? You haven't got anything to do with your arms. You're in a straitjacket. You've got to do it entirely with your face and your voice. And you've got this shifting monologue that just goes on and on and on and on and on.
Well, it's actually
you've kind of got to be intense all the way through, and it actually gets watching the director's cut. It's not Dourif's fault, but it gets a little bit kind of. What's happening?
Right. I imagine that intensity.
I think it's probably hitting on
painful. It would be difficult for the audience to take. Well,
I think generally you're hitting on
three
something
times.
That's really...
Some of the stuff he's got, it's like 3-4 times as long as the most intense monologue Macbeth gets. And
right.
But I think you're hitting on something as well. That is, an issue with Blatty for me, which is, I think, in almost every respect, and now, interestingly, I think sometimes it works. It's a sort of a bit hit and miss. But he is an overwriter, he is an over-editor, and he's an over-director. He seems to have a great deal of intensity he himself brings to the project, and there was many times through it.
Attractive trait in many respects, because his stuff always reeks of this guy is passionate about what he wants to say.
I
like that, even if a lot of what he's got to say is very much not to my taste.
Right.
But I think where it works best is his use of dialogue and his use of mise-en-scène are so theatrical that you kind of almost want a two-hander, if not stage version of the thing, but almost a cinema stage version of the thing that's sort of stripped to Kinderman and the Gemini with cutaways. Maybe a different structure for the film. It would make it a different kind of film. But sculpting back the dialogue, because one of the things that we talked about right at the top of it with George C. Scott, George C. Scott's got he's one of the most expressive looking of that era of actors. Don't give him so much to say. He can say so much of it with his hand. Dourif, in a very different way, and in a younger way, in a more modern way, has the same kind of technique. But I know what you mean, because I was watching some of those scenes from the director's cut subsequently with Dourif, and it's like I'm thinking, with the mindset of an actor, it's like, oh my God, he can't just do a wash here, a wash of emotion. He's got to find gear changes. He's got to find gear changes that make sense. As Jack said, he's got very little physicality he can give. He can lean, and he can use levels of tension, but he has to do it through eyes and through voice, and it's just too much. I think it's because what Blatty ends up doing is it's such a big concept that he ends up explaining it through dialogue and exposition, and then you're like, now I've got to
loads of what Dourif gets in the last third of the film is just info dump. Let's be honest.
It is. Yeah.
And it's because conceptually it's so complex, isn't it?
I know, and there's also
character is so complex.
There's part of me which actually really does rather like something which is considered now in our era of script 101 insistence, and that is the tell don't show quality of quite a lot of this film actually appeals to me.
Yeah, I don't have an inherent problem with just dialogue that's explanation. It's not just inherently bad as some.
It's all about the framing, isn't it? It's all about the framing.
All about the framing, and I always maintain that, just on a personal level, purely subjectively, the implications that are created by people just in rooms talking, particularly in horror, can sometimes be the most horrifying things. It's the realization of a character as another character tells them something about something else that pertains to the moment they're in, or they've already seen, or that's being foreshadowed. Those moments are always invariably the most terrifying.
Yeah, it can be wonderful. It can be done so beautifully. I mean, there are actually entire genres of fiction. I mean, look at things like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It's just characters talking. It's nothing else. There is literally nothing else in it.
Exactly.
The other thing that's fascinating about the director's cut is that, I mean, there is so much that's in the theatrical cut that isn't just not in the director's cut. The entire subplot about Father Morning is cut. Father Morning is not in the director's cut. Nicole Williamson's not in it. The exorcism at the end doesn't happen.
Yes, the exorcism was an insert, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was it. The studio looked at Blatty's original assemblage, and he knew this was possible. It was in his contract. He said, "I get to make my cut. You show it to a test audience. You decide based on their reaction, and then you get the final cut." And they showed it to a test audience, and he's got all sorts of sour grapes to say about this. But he says the test audience were they deliberately chose them to be complete idiots or something. I don't know.
Right.
Anyway, okay. The studio exercised their right to say no. Go back and they had to remount the production. They said you've got to remount the production. We need stuff added. And one of the things they insisted upon being added was an exorcism
in a film called The Exorcist. See their point?
Yeah. And I love the last bit because it just goes batshit fucking crazy.
It just loses it, doesn't it? It just goes nuts.
Well, the film is so operatic anyway. Surreal. You need a payoff. You need a prestige.
Well, you do, because there's no payoff in the director's cut. Kinderman goes home because he's worked out that the old lady is going to be going after his family. He gets there. You get the whole thing with the scissors and the neck and so forth. And the woman attacks him. And you know how in the theatrical version, the woman who's attacking him, who's strangling him, sort of pulls back at the last moment because Father Morning arrives at the psych ward. That's not what happens in the director's cut. In the director's cut, the woman just slacks off and sort of backs away. And Kinderman says Damien, like Damien is in there somehow fighting back. Right. And then Kinderman goes back to the psych ward and shoots patient X. The end. That's it. That's literally it. And it's nowhere near as good. It's a total anticlimax. I love that last bit of the theatrical version, as fucking crazy as it is. It has those wonderful surreal images. You get like these, suddenly there's cobras and the, frankly, it's one of the most shocking things I've ever seen in a film, to be honest with you, because it contains not only a horrific image of mutilation, but it's a horrifyingly racist desecration, because you get the shot of the desecrated corpse of the boy Kintry. And the statue of Christ, the head of the statue of Christ has been put onto his, his de-headed shoulders. And as Kinderman describes earlier in the film, in insulting minstrel blackface with these pins or whatever they are jammed into his eyes. It's a horrifying image, and I'm really genuinely not sure how I feel about it. I'm not sure it was the sort of thing that anybody should have done, but they did it, and it's in there, and it has a very powerful effect.
It has power.
Film in
you just don't. And the amazing gore moment where Morning is sort of stuck to the ceiling and his own weight pulls his skin. That is genuinely hellish.
That always sticks with me for some reason. That is like Hellraiser Barker-esque levels of mutilation, isn't it? It's like, my God.
And I think if you're going to have a film that Blatty, who's going for something a bit, he's going for something more contemplative, etc. He thinks, because I don't actually think his contemplations are worth very much, frankly, on the problem of evil or any of that stuff. But that's what he's going for. And you can understand how he feels sore about this, because the studio says, no, we need a guy's skin being torn off, but a guy's skin being torn off. And, I get that, but I prefer the theatrical version.
Yeah, from the
But
sound of it, I think I would too. I mean, I really don't like this whole thing with Brad Dourif. I really don't like it. As him being presented as though he is Damien Karras. Don't like it.
He's just recast in the same way that the other characters are recast.
But if you're going to have a film that is already at the beginning and in the middle sections, not pulling its punches with imagery. I mean, it's very lurid. And I don't mean that in a way to denigrate it, but the image of the waiting room of heaven, the eyes of Christ blinking open and bleeding. This film's not pulling any punches.
That's a serious mistake.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're really, I can sympathise entirely with the studio execs going, well, the only way we can go is bigger. Because you can't diminish at the end of all that with just. But I know that also that there was another draft again, where Brad Dourif's character just dies, and it's simply because.
That's what happens in the book.
Yes, that's it. But I think there was an attempt to adapt this initially, which is the idea that the motivating factor for not the Zodiac, the Gemini, is an issue with his father, and his father dies during the sequences of Legion. Then he goes, oh well, okay, I might as well die as well now, because he was the. It's a little bit like at the end of the novel of Jaws, which again Spielberg went, we can't have this, where the shark just goes, I think I've got a bit of indigestion. I think I'm just going to die. We can't really do this.
An anticlimax, wouldn't it? The shark is full.
The shark's got acid reflux, and it's like, no. It just needs a giant Alka-Seltzer and a light hand.
It shows, I think, that for all he might have read lots of theology, he might have read lots of Ignatius Loyola and Teilhard de Chardin and all this stuff. Blatty doesn't know very much about serial killers, because if the guy says, I kill people to punish and shame my father, and my father's now dead, so I don't need to do it anymore. No.
It's not really how it works, is it?
Well, I wouldn't. I don't take any pleasure from killing people. I wouldn't do it otherwise. It's just to annoy my dad.
It's an expression to annoy my dad. Right. Yeah. And it's also very contrary to the way the Gemini Killer describes what he does throughout the film. I mean, he loves it, doesn't he? I mean, when he's describing what he does, and it's so graphic, it's so elaborate what he does to people. It contrasts massively with that. There's passion there. There's like an almost like sexualized passion to it. It's like
and the wonderfully macabre idea of cutting somebody's head off so quickly and cleanly, like a guillotine, and then because the head will continue to be alive, so to speak, for another 20 seconds, you can sort of show it its own body. That's so grotesquely awful. That's another thing that's stuck in my head from the very first viewing.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. This character wallows in that, of course, doesn't he? In the morbid and the macabre. He loves the elaboration of what you can do to a human body while it's still alive, the pain you can inflict. It's like, he's as, I mean, part of the irony, of course, is you don't even need Pazuzu at this point. Pazuzu's almost surplus to requirements. The Gemini Killer is monster enough.
This is one of the things. I mean,
Pazuzu is in
this.
He is in there. He is one of the many demons that's supposed to be in Karras, isn't he?
But he's not doing anything.
No, he's not. No.
You kind of hear the demon voice a few times, voiced by Colleen Dewhurst again, because she took over from Mercedes McCambridge in the second movie, so it's all Colleen Dewhurst. But
former spouse of George C. Scott as well.
Twice a former spouse of George C. Scott.
Got around, didn't he, that gentleman? He got around.
Yeah. But Pazuzu's strangely passive in this. It's like he's just sat in there.
His whole role was simply to push the Gemini Killer into Karras as what is described as a kind of revenge, and but that's it. That's it. It's Prime mover. That's it.
Yeah, he facilitates the supernatural stuff, and that is it. Pazuzu himself never actually really turns up.
Yeah.
No, not really. No, which is interesting.
It is bizarre, isn't it? I mean, you would have thought what they might have done is thrown in maybe a few more subliminal shots of the Pazuzu face at some point, or something to that effect.
Well, it's interesting how resolutely the second film focuses on Merrin and Pazuzu. Right. Karras, I'm not sure Karras is even mentioned in the second film.
Not to my memory.
Whereas the third film, it smacks of a reaction against it, doesn't it? I mean, I know nobody was happy with the second one, apart from possibly the director. But it smacks of a reaction because the third film goes, we're barely going to mention Merrin, if at all. We're going to concentrate on Karras, and Pazuzu goes into the background. Yeah.
Though you do also realize that some of it is, it's almost like it's the third installment, which is almost acting like the direct sequel, but at the same time, we are in a world and in a scenario that's not quite the original Exorcist as well, because we do have to sort of accept that, there's suddenly this relationship with Karras, which none of these people actually had. It was all very in passing. And
he actually describes, in Legion, Karras as my best friend, doesn't he?
Yes, Kinderman is a friend of Karras,
Yeah, in the original film, and I believe it's the same in the novel.
Antagonistic.
Well, yeah, and they've only just met.
It's the main thing. Yeah.
The implication in Legion is that they've been friends for a long, long time, which it's very strange. Yeah,
so you end up in a kind of warped version of the. It's sort of retroactively redoing the continuity, but that's fine. I have no problem.
Yeah, no problem with that whatsoever. Absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. And that's the kind of thing that upsets YouTube people quite a lot, isn't it? Which is fine by me.
One of the reasons to deliberately do it, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. These are people who try to find continuity in The Simpsons. So it's like
it's that very blatty thing. I think we're saying about his intensity, his passion for ideas, and I think he is definitely someone who throws a lot at things, because there was one moment where I thought, I wonder if there's, because I hadn't seen it for years, so I thought maybe it was either left out in the edit, or it was also something he went, I'll come back to that, and then didn't, which was when you get the reveal of It's a Wonderful with the dark L life underneath the curtain, and then much later on when you get references to John Donne's Death Be Not Proud, which is a very interesting choice of poem for other reasons that I'd like to come back to, but of course the original form that Donne and Marvell and all those, all the metaphysical poets would have written in, well, they would have used dark L's on all full words, such as wonderful. So I had this thought: is the Donne thing, the John Donne thing, is it more? Is there more to this coming up? And of course, it's not. It is rather abandoned. But I think it's just indicative of the fact that Blatty is someone who is an absolute reservoir of ideas when it comes, and maybe just struggles to get them all out in the most elegant way. But fascinating insofar as knowing that the Death Be Not Proud diminishes the idea of any personification of death. It is not that important, and having spent the best part of 3 movies really playing up the idea that yes, demons do exist, that the Catholic narrative for our earthly life is correct. Then to start quoting John Donne's Death Be Not Proud, this is an interesting
that's really strange, isn't it? That is really strange. There's almost like a metaphysical contrast going on there.
Almost like it's like a break. It's almost like the exorcism itself has not only broken the connection to the realm of the demons, but it's almost like it's broken the entire logic of, or certainly the entire ideology, for want of a better word, as a way of explaining the world.
Yeah, that is very peculiar.
It's interesting to choose Donne, because Donne famously was a libertine who became a very pious priest and a theologian. So I don't know where to go with that, but
but again, I think it's indicative of sort of Blatty's modus operandi, which he drags a lot out of the earth and sort of throws it at the page.
Yeah.
And some of it, it makes sense.
Some of it sticks, some of it doesn't.
I mean, sometimes it looks. I mean, I know with the the use of his references to like Macbeth and the hell of Macbeth, and there's a reference to Titus Andronicus. Now that can come across a bit like a kind of middle brow. I'm just throwing in bits of Shakespeare because that'll make. But again, it's one of those things. I think, yeah, you really wanted to go somewhere with that, because I mean, Macbeth, obviously, of course, is the most hellish of Shakespeare's plays, where the world is really, they are catapulted into hell. There's that whole thing plays out in a kind of hell, and I just feel all the way through it's like you want to go somewhere with that, don't you? And you just can't get there. And
it almost gets there, doesn't it? I mean, there's almost like a tonal overlap and it's always in those sequences where Kinderman is talking to the Gemini killer, where it does feel as though the world is filth.
Yes, I mean, he tries to do it again with Vietnam. I mean, you literally almost only get one shot, which is the shot of the 3 helicopters, which sort of evokes Apocalypse Now and things. And you do get this interesting sense of a kind of original sin thing over the period, after old wholesome Jimmy Stewart's talking to angels in It's a Wonderful Life. Then you're into the like Helter Skelter, the Zodiac, Vietnam. Nixon, and it almost seems like he wants to say something has warped more profoundly.
Yeah, it's almost like he's trying to comment on the 20th century.
He doesn't quite get there.
No,
but
he
at
doesn't.
a particular point in the 20th century, like he sees a loss of innocence or a fall from grace at a particular moment in the latter half of the 20th century. Yeah.
Look, Blatty is somebody who wants to be a theologian. He wants to be writing sophisticated apologias for Christian belief, and I don't want to sound like I'm being mean, but he doesn't have it in him. I read the novel Legion in preparation for this, and it gets good about just over halfway through, and then it fizzles out at the end. But long stretches of the
Have you read the original Exorcist?
Yes, which is
like that. It's very like that.
It's much better though. The original Exorcist novel is quite
more
good.
His milieu, isn't it? It's quieter. It gives him more space to expand upon. But he does that a lot. He does sort of exposit a lot.
He does. The original Exorcist novel, I think, is less ambitious, funnily enough, and that's why it works better. And it is better written. Although Legion is well written on the whole. And then you get to the more than halfway. Again, there's a character and a plot thread in the novel which is completely absent from the film. There's this whole thing in the novel about this Dr. Amfortis, whose wife died. And he's so desperate with grief that he starts. I mean, this is actually, funnily enough, we said about how this film is a bit of a byway for us on this series because we're going off our beaten track, which is where
I called it a palate cleanser. I think.
We've been thinking very much about certain things. We've been thinking about witches and witchcraft and stuff like that. And we've also been thinking about media, and hauntological media and technology and recording and stuff like that in terms of these kinds of uncanny stories. The funny thing is that's in the Legion novel because there's this whole subplot. Yeah, there's this whole subplot in the novel about this guy who's at the hospital, Dr. Amfortis, who's trying to contact his dead wife through mechanical audio equipment.
Right.
He's doing that thing. I can't remember what. It's very popular now. It's in a field, in quote unquote paranormal research or whatever, where people like turn electrical equipment on and listen to the static.
Oh, I see.
They
and
supposedly
ask it
hear
questions and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And try to. That it said no. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
That
There's a really
whole
bad movie from a few years ago, Michael Keaton, called White Noise, where he does it. And it's all over YouTube now. There's actually apps. There's phone apps where you put it on your phone, and it just plays random snatches of words at you. And there's guys that just walk around houses with this app going on their phone, filming themselves, reacting to it as though they're actually picking up ghosts in the house. It's very funny. But
it's very
the thing is, that's in the book. That he's what he does is he buys increasingly sophisticated microphones and tape recorders, and he records empty air, so to speak, and then he listens back to the reel-to-reel tape recorders, and he gets snatches of human voices, including it's actually quite complicated what happens, because one of the voices he hears as somebody else's voice, but he plays it to somebody else and they hear it as his voice.
Oh, no, that's interesting. I like that.
It's very interesting. I was kind of despairing of this book until suddenly we get to the end of part 1, which is about halfway through, and then we get to the beginning of part 2, and it starts with this guy who has appeared here and there in the first part, and you get like his first-hand account of what he's been doing, and suddenly I'm listening to the audiobook and I'm thinking, oh, what happened? This suddenly got really interesting.
I want to follow this guy and what he's doing.
But long stretches of the first part, it actually, just again to digress on this, the thing about that kind of listening for the voices of the dead on audio equipment does show up in the movie, because there's the lady who has the sort of spectral radio that she wants George C. Scott to fix. And then later on, there's another of the old ladies in the hospital who's kind of listening to a radio that isn't switched on. And when George C. Scott dreams / travels to the afterlife waiting room or railway station, there's a scene where somebody's talking into a microphone, and she's saying, calling the living, and you get Samuel L. Jackson, although his voice is dubbed, saying, oh, the living are deaf. It's in there. It gets through, although it's the entire Amfortis subplot is cut.
What I love about
to
that
finally get to my main point that I was trying to get to was that in the first part of the novel, it's over and over and over and over again, Dyer and Kinderman, and particularly just Kinderman on his own, just rambling at his subordinates about the problem of evil, just over and over. And also, it sounds to me kind of like denying evolution as well. Like loads of really sort of intelligent design sounding stuff about how evolution doesn't work, and really very, very, I mean, to be honest with you, very trite and fatuous, and he doesn't know what he's talking about, frankly, when he's talking about evolution. And his solutions to the problem of evil, theodicy, they're as weak as they always are, frankly. But this is what really interests Blatty.
I mean, it's just as a quick digression before I think we should pursue that, is I found it very amusing, just insofar as, Kinderman is presented to us as being the sort of four-square cop. He's a family man. He's absolutely white, straight, middle-class male with on the side of the establishment. And then we end up in his...
I'll tell you one thing, in the movie they downplay it, but in the book he is very, 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 very Jewish. I mean, like stereotypically Jewish.
Oh,
it's really quite uncomfortable at times. I don't think Blatty is being anti-Semitic, but at least not consciously. But bits of it are really kind of.
Right. But we end up in his afterlife, and it is such or his conception of the afterlife, or his dream, and it's such a lid lifted. Well, this is it. It's like, why are these people at Kinderman? What's going on underneath that veneer of middle class, straight kind of respect? It's like, you've got some really interesting obsessions, man.
It's very gay, isn't it? It's very gay. Very gay. It's a moment in the film that just doesn't fit at all in the film. Totally does not fit. It's so strange.
Why is Larry King
wonderfully surreal?
Of course, he is there now, but he wasn't then. But it's just so. But again, it's that thing of because obviously he's responsible for the execution of his own work. It's he does not hold back. I mean, they've got the full wing. I mean, it is his character's conception. I mean, that but there they are, the full wings, and we're back into the crying statues. It's extraordinary.
It's quite Hollywood influenced as well, isn't it? If you think about stuff like Waiting for Mr. Jordan, actually, and A Matter of Life and Death, and Hollywood, and I know Matter of Life and Death isn't Hollywood, but you know what I mean. Classic cinematic pop culture depictions of the afterlife. I think that's meant to be the idea.
It's very literal.
Well, I mean, even It's a Wonderful Life itself, which roots the idea of the afterlife and the afterlife's connection and communication with us, very much in terms of like corporate logic. And it's like, wow, and that's how pervasive this whole thing is. It's all about
God, can you imagine turning up in any form of the afterlife and finding out that it's like that it's like
Yeah.
Beetlejuice or something to that effect, where there's protocol.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you
you'd be in hell.
all over
you?
again,
You wouldn't be in
you?
heaven.
Yeah.
Right.
You would know you'd be in hell. Then.
Right,
It's like, oh, right.
right.
No matter what you're presenting to me, I am definitely in hell now.
Yeah.
But I think
wow.
it is, because I don't really know a great deal about Blatty's background, but obviously there's this sense of it seems like an obsession, because I imagine, just talking generally, most people have probably abandoned their faith because they are confronted by a concept of evil. That must rank as the biggest test of faith, I imagine. The greatest temptation to become someone without faith, to give up your faith, to become an unbeliever. I mean, it's in religious text. The Book of Job is the obvious one, but am I right in saying, because I don't know much about his background, that this is something that is, basically a carry through a lot of his? I mean, was he a Catholic himself?
Oh yes, very much so. Yeah.
I mean,
the epigraph at the start of the original Exorcist novel he dedicates the novel to the Jesuits, quote, who taught me how to think, unquote.
Oh wow.
Yeah, he's absolutely obsessed with the notion of sort of Catholic mystery. That's
nice. I came here with having done my research, isn't it?
he's not just Catholic. He's very Society of Jesus Catholic.
Yeah, very much so. And it's these things that obsess him. And there is a sort of almost navel gazing obsession, isn't there, about things like the problem of evil. And what I find with him is he never really explores it to any great depth, despite going over it again and again and again and again.
This is pretty heavy stuff, but to me, the problem of evil is just unanswerable.
Unanswerable. Right.
I've never encountered a single answer from any Christian apologetics that ever made a dent in it.
Well, you know what the big problem is? It's consistently misread. That's the big problem. Where it's taken literally. People take it literally. When they're asked about the problem of evil, they answer in terms of morality, and that doesn't work in and of itself. But it's not asking about that. It's asking about imperfection. If there is a perfect creator, from whence imperfection, that's the crux of it.
Yeah,
and
the evil the evil in the phrase doesn't just refer to serial killers; it refers to earthquakes and meningitis, etc.
It refers to imperfection. It refers to the imperfection of being, of creation, when synthesized down, and it's never. You cannot answer it. It is actually unanswerable.
Almost every answer you get in some form or another boils down to free will, right? And that's a terrible answer. I mean, Bart Ehrman has put this better than anybody, and it's not a particularly sophisticated argument, but it doesn't have to be. He just said, if God is that good, if he's that clever, if he's perfect, why, he couldn't have imagined a system whereby we get free will but we don't get cholera. I mean,
it goes further. It goes deeper than that. It goes deeper than that. I mean, you don't even have to go that far with it. I mean, all you have to look at is existence itself. If God is perfect, for a given definition of perfection, then why does it create anything? Why does it have the imperative to create at all?
Yeah.
Most of my understanding of, say, St. Augustine and Irianus comes from John Hick. But, St. Augustine is like, well, it's how you see life, glass is half empty, or glass. That basically is all St. Augustine says. Is, well, it's either half empty or it's half full. That'll determine your notion of good and evil. Irianus at least tries for something a bit more. But again, we're in the realms of, as Jack referred to earlier, theodicy, that it's all part of a balance to get human beings to see and embrace goodness. Therefore, they must be confronted with
free
evil.
Will.
They must be we're back to free will. It must be confronted. Now, one of the people that, interestingly, that I always think of in respect to this conversation is a comment made by Terry Eagleton.
Yes,
which when he talks.
Very sympathetic.
He's very sympathetic, but he talks. I mean, when he talks about non-being in relation to the idea of evil, so it's the will to annihilate, to eradicate anything that has it can be interpreted as impure or some threat to our selfhood. But the wonderful thing, there's a great quote by Terry Eagleton that I thought of immediately when I thought, well, I better think of something to say about this film Legion. And he says in one of his books, the names for it have been, quote, the names for it have been legion through history.
Yes.
Arab, Jew, woman, communist, homosexual, etc. But he brings it back to this idea of this being earthly evil, because Terry Eagleton, being an atheist who is sympathetic to faith and religion, sort of wrests it from St. Augustine and theodicy. But I just remembered that quote as though, oh my God, yeah. And I actually ran off to check it. It's like, yes, the names of evil, earthly evil, when we try and dismantle it from the context of esoteria and so on, its names are legion. And I thought, oh yeah, well, that's perfect.
I love it. Yeah, no, I mean, the problem of evil is you a God who is not in any sense that humans can imagine or comprehend moral can survive it. A God who is in some sense not all powerful can survive it, but you simply cannot have a God who is both all powerful and in any way comprehensible to human beings morally good. It is just an annihilating objection, and I've never seen an argument. Sophisticated, interesting ruminations upon it, but no solution to it that gets normal Christian belief out of the trap.
No,
nothing.
I mean that which you've just talked about. I mean that's almost absolutely where David Hume went, wasn't it, with their dialogues concerning natural religion and things like that. If God's willing to prevent evil but not able to, then how is he omnipotent? Is he actually impotent? Is he able? Is he not willing? Therefore, is he malevolent? Is he both and willing? And
of course, that goes right back to classical antiquity. I can't remember if it was Democritus or Epicurus or whoever who said, but
it really is a fundamental question, isn't it? How can an entity that is described as perfect create imperfection? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Because the ontological argument is offered as a proof, and firstly it's not. But secondly, if you reverse the ontological argument, you actually get pretty close to disproof.
Right.
But it's so interesting in the context of the movie when Scott Kinderman rather is pinned to the wall, and he sort of reverses the negation, and it's like, of course I believe in all these things, because these things are now presented to me, they're unveiled. And that extraordinary litany, which I think Scott's brilliant at, because he doesn't hold back. He just and also, how can you hold back in a scene like that? You're pinned to a wall, and basically the entire something like $5 million of emergency budget have been brought in to blow on a 5-minute scene.
You got to go for it.
It is a great bit, isn't it? I love like the passion in his voice, like the execrable passion where he's describing just the filth of the earth, the filth of everything. And
he's very good at disgust.
Oh, it's brilliant. But what Blatty seems to be, we can talk about, Hume, or we could talk about, Swinburne or Leibniz or any of those people or St. Augustine and their attempts to try and but it just seems that Blatty in that moment is just asserting hell is a result of God's love, because everything is. And Kinderman is
I've been quite rough on Blatty, but he is honest enough to admit the scale of the problem. He doesn't try to pretend that evil isn't a problem.
No. Yeah, I mean, and the good theologians don't.
Yeah,
they treat it as a matter of contemplation, don't they?
Yeah, the very fact that Blatty's so obsessed with it and spends all this time ruminating about it shows that he understands that it is an issue.
I mean, in many respects, this could be seen as a wrestling with that, couldn't it? I mean, if it must be a problem. I mean, it's difficult, obviously, for those of us who don't have faith and have never had faith to imagine, but it must be problematic, especially when you've got situations like those presented in this film where there is elemental evil, there is absolute evil in this universe. It manifests as an entity, as a creature.
Well, one of the things I've always found very difficult to understand about the idea. I mean, in the original Exorcist, I think I'm pretty sure this is in the novel and I don't think it's in the theatrical cut, actually, but I think it's in the director's cut. There is a scene where Damien actually asks Merrin during the exorcism. He actually says to him, what is this for? What's the point? Why is it doing this? And Merrin's offered response is, it's to make us despair. And I think the idea is that it's to make human beings despair of goodness, despair of their own ability to be good enough for God.
Fair enough.
Which is
the
totally
trouble
Job, isn't it? That's Book of Job.
Oh yeah,
in a
totally.
nutshell.
The trouble is that the minute a supernatural demon inhabits a human consciousness, a human body, and desecrates it the way the child is desecrated in the film and the book, and gives, within certain parameters, undeniable proof of supernatural phenomena,
right,
and its own demonic, its own diabolical nature. What it's actually doing is not destroying the human ability to hope. It's actually restoring it.
It's restoring it, right?
Exactly.
Yes, it is demonstrating that this is a world of miracles, right?
Yeah, and this kind of loops back to what you were saying at the start, George, which is that, if a creature like this actually did stuff like this, you would want to ask it serious questions. And my first serious question would be, what are you really up to?
Yeah, what are you doing? What is the agenda here? Because, let's have a look at this. Pazuzu is intelligent, right? Pazuzu is remarkably intelligent. It's existed for millions of years. It has seen civilizations rise and fall. Surely it has more going for it than just like performing grotesque parlor tricks in a little girl's body. Because ultimately, this is your expression of evil? Really? All you do is perform grotesque parlor tricks. You don't actually do anything that terrible. You do realize
it's kind of implied, isn't it, that what it's actually doing is luring Merrin there?
Yeah.
Or did I just imagine that?
Even then, it's like, so what?
And again, to give it its due, it's a bad film, but number 2 does kind of pick that up and runs with it. It kind of picks up the idea that what's actually going on here is some kind of very high stakes contest between the demon and Merrin specifically. And Regan is kind of just, she's either just caught in the crossfire, or she's chosen precisely because she has the potential to achieve something huge on a spiritual level because of some ability that she has, or innate goodness.
I think what we've really demonstrated there, Jack, is the big problem I have with possession films in general. I've always found them very, very, very difficult, and that is the reason why. What you've just described is, if you buy into the universe of the films, it's framed as this epic contest between good and evil. But if you are outside that context, you just like, well, so what? Even if it is that, so what? Who cares? It's not that great a demonstration, is it? It's kind of petty on both sides.
Yeah, I suppose it is. Except that, again, the second film, for all its faults, it does try to address this, because it implies that Merrin is kind of it implies an almost heretical, because it's not entirely certain who the heretic of the title is. Right. There is a sense in which Merrin is, apparently, he's kind of a suspect figure within the church. I mean, the Richard Burton character Lamont even goes to the Vatican, and there are apparently these big concerns about Merrin, even though he's dead, in the Vatican. And part of his job supposedly is to investigate and kind of vindicate Merrin, because people are really concerned about Merrin's ideas. And it's like, what Merrin is doing is kind of, by battling demons, it's like the demons that inhabit particular people lead him to people who are needed. And so his quest, I mean, I'm extrapolating like crazy, because this is anything but a clear movie. One of the big problems with it is that it's boring, and one of the big problems, one of the reasons it's boring, is that it's very difficult to tell at any given moment what anybody is thinking or why they're doing what they're doing. But yeah, the second film does try to imply a much bigger cosmology.
It does, doesn't it? It tries to imply that maybe
Merrin has a big project underway that isn't even necessarily particularly Catholic,
Yes, I mean, that's
more
something.
Elemental force.
Right,
that is.
That's something that the heretic does that is actually really interesting, which is it removes it slightly from the dogma of the other films. It makes it seem as though the language and the rituals of Catholicism are simply what works for this particular branch of people, but it actually manifests all across the spectrum. It's something more fundamentally metaphysical and fundamentally human.
Because the only real takeaway you can make from the initial movie, I mean, trying to think back to a time before the Heretic and Legion even come about, it takes a bit of a push as well is just the notion of, from Pazuzu's point of view, that this is all it takes to bring down your house of cards. This is all I have to do. However, that's undone because, I mean, we are shown something of an ordeal in the Exorcism, but I mean, it works.
Yeah.
And then you're just left with, well, unless this is happening simultaneously to children all across the world, it's not much of a. It's not much of a battle.
One of the Exorcist is kind of caught in this basic trap that is fundamental to its structure, to what it is, because it is trying to be quite faithful to the actual facts of how actual cases of quote unquote demonic possession work, right? It is quite closely based on, I think it's a synthesis of 2 or 3 different documented cases, and it bases itself quite, like loads of the stuff that's in it, like the inappropriate sexual behavior and the swearing and all this stuff. I mean, we would certainly look upon these things as more likely evidence of possible schizophrenia and possible child abuse, etc., etc. But these are comparatively quite recent ways of understanding these things. For a long time, this is something that happens. It's not demons getting into children, but this is something that happens, and there's lots of cases of it, and there are documented things that tend to happen within cases of demonic possession. Children develop aversions to religious iconography. Gee, I wonder why that. You know what I mean, right? And Blatty is serious enough to say, right, we're going to have a serious look at an actual phenomenon and do his research and say, right, this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens. And so we're putting that into the story, and we're not doing it it sounds like a strange thing to say about that movie, but we're not going to do it in a sensational way. We're going to do it in a very sort of cold and clinical and realist style, etc., etc. But it's also, the problem is that it's also coming from an avowedly, committedly Catholic point of view. So it's interpreting these events in a particular way. So what you end up with is essentially a story that makes no sense because it is a very definite supernatural interpretation of events which are quite realistically rendered within certain parameters, which in the real world are nothing to do with demons. They're to do with psychological disturbance, etc.
Right. Yeah.
So really, there's just a trap there right from the start. The film is not going to be able to explain what it shows you because it shows you fairly honestly what happens, and then it offers you as fact an explanation that is wrong.
And then, as I said earlier, the second film ends up feeling almost hidebound to come up with a reason, and it's a bit which comes back to the thing of, especially good people or especially innocent people, and you think, well, it still doesn't take us too much further into
supposedly this is what attracted Borman to it, because he said that the original script he said was about sort of goodness, and he was attracted to the idea because he didn't like the first movie. He was offered the first movie as director and he turned it down because he didn't like the script. And he was offered the second movie and he said, this I will do as a kind of he actually said, I will do it as a kind of riposte to the first movie because I don't like the first movie, but I do like this script that I have that is about goodness, that is about people being good and finding goodness out of adversity and stuff like that. And then it turns into a fucking mess because Borman being Borman, he rewrites it every day, etc., etc. But that's what the second film is going for. The second film is actually, I mean, for all that it is a bloody mess, and it is, and let's not sugarcoat it, it is trying to grapple with some of this. I love that it goes back to some of the stuff that Pazuzu actually is, because Pazuzu is, Pazuzu gets a bad rap because Pazuzu is, of course, an actual Mesopotamian.
Yes, it's a Mesopotamian god,
that was kind of appropriated by Christians as a satanic or diabolical demon, in that sense. But when they talked about demons, when they used their word equivalent to that, they didn't mean what we think of as demons. They were talking about just supernatural spirits.
A principality, an entity that is elemental.
These people, these pre-Christian people, to them Pazuzu was evil in the, I mean, it was what you were saying before about evil being more to do with not malevolence necessarily, but to do with the imperfection of the world. Pazuzu, like so many of these anthropomorphic deity figures. He was an expression of things like famine and drought and plagues of locusts. But the interesting thing about Pazuzu is that he could be induced to help you. People wore amulets because he fought. He was a rival of, and he was thought to fight with another figure of the same type. I think she was called Lameshtu or something like that, who was like this figure who obviously what she represents is the danger of childbirth and the danger of having a young, infant mortality, because she was said to steal women's babies. She was said to cause illness in pregnant mothers and stuff like that. Right. So she is the anthropomorphic personification of the fact that back then having a baby was bloody dangerous. You were likely to die. Your baby was likely to die. And people would, because she and Pazuzu were rivals, people would enlist Pazuzu's help against Lamashtu.
Absolutely fascinating. I love that. I love that so much.
So he wasn't evil. He was just a person like Set, actually, in Egypt. He's come down to us in pop culture as an evil god, particularly in Doctor Who. He wasn't evil at all. He was the god of the Western Desert. He was the god of the wind and things like this. He was dangerous. He, you had to watch the bastard, but he wasn't evil in the sense that, I will get you. I will rule the universe.
Another very good example in pop culture.
But of course, this is how the
Hades, of course.
Yes, but this is of course how any hegemonic religion has to deal with anything that it is forced to negate. Paganism, whatever. The idea that it's recharacterized as being
it assimilates,
in the negative. It's evil. It's they take most of it and add it to themselves. It's all very Borg, isn't it?
Well, in this episode, the assimilating, collecting force, that, because we've talked about this in other episodes, in this it's Christianity, obviously.
I mean, there really is scope if they just thought about it right down the line, to even have suggested that there is something minor and about demons such as Pazuzu. I mean, it wouldn't make a very effective film, because of course you have to ramp up the idea that it's a threat, it's a real genuine threat,
epic evil.
But the idea of these sort of all we've got left, we've been sort of relegated, we're sort of in this realm is, we'll have to be kind of trickster gods. That's as good as we can be. But of course it runs headlong into the logic of this kind of cinema, which is we have to frighten the bejesus out of the audience and say this is a big deal. Now, the only way that can work is that if Reagan becomes the portal for something which then can do greater harm. But actually, all that's going to happen is she is going to decompose.
Right.
And so what? I mean,
right.
it's
in the
terrible
wider
for
sense,
Reagan and her mother, but
and her family. But in the wider sense, it's not really doing anything. It hasn't possessed a president and launched nuclear missiles all over the world or anything like that, has it?
Or as I said, if it was,
although funnly enough, that
case
is kind
after
of
case after case was coming up, during, then you've got, oh my God, it's other demons are coming through and they're choosing children, and that can rock.
It always, it always puts me in mind of Aleister Crowley.
Isolated case.
People like Aleister Crowley. Now, Aleister Crowley was described as the most evil man in the world. Yeah. He wasn't an evil man. He wasn't the most evil man in the world. He was just a shyster. He was just a charlatan.
Ridiculous.
Right.
The most evil man in the world. In a world that had Hitler and Mussolini,
that had politicians who were committing more evil acts every fucking day, every hour of every day. It's absurd.
He was a shit. Let's not be. Let's be honest.
Don't get me wrong. He was an absolute charlatan shyster and was a really nasty piece of work. But the most evil man in the world.
It's ridiculous.
It's compared to what?
And this is where we do run into problems, because this is ultimately very petty stuff, isn't it? I mean.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, at least in Legion, there is a sense that in the theatrical cut that there is a greater danger here, that Karis / the Gemini killer becomes a vehicle through his mind to reach into other people and kill that way indiscriminately, and you never trace back that, because the person who did it only ever does the one crime, even though it's a serious. Now that's more interesting. I mean, that warrants, I think, more of it. And in a way, for all its its messiness and how Blatty does throw stuff at a wall, and it is, as a film, this is the most effective one. This is the one.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
pretty
I
much
totally agree.
within the confines of, and factoring in the flaws, it's the most successful.
Yeah, I agree. And conceptually the most interesting as well. It doesn't always pay off with its concepts, but it is conceptually the most interesting.
And strangely in bits of detail as well, because and with a big smile on my face, I have to say, I turned to my partner, because in this, the scene with the chief psychiatrist is rehearsing what he's going to say. I was like, this is, and I turned to my partner and said, I cannot believe it took an almost straight to video horror film. I've never seen this anywhere. I said, this is so human. This is so relatable. This is such a lovely moment, because I've done it. Oh my God, I've done it. Making telephone calls, and it's all written down, and I'm trying to make it a spontaneous speech and everything. And it's a lovely, lovely detail. It doesn't have any impact on the rest of the film, but it's like there's moments when Blatty is really inspired. I thought, I've seen films by the so-called greatest screenwriters of all time. They never do anything like this. That's so human and so wonderfully eccentric, and yet totally relatable.
I love that character. I love how well characterized he is. I love how the walls of his office characterize him. I think the performance is brilliant. Again, it's an interesting thing where turning this into a movie from a novel is very much to its benefit in some respects, because Blatty has to really pare him down, because he's in the novel, and in the novel there's this whole sort of subplot about maybe he's the killer, and it turns out he was actually the doctor that worked with the police on the original Gemini case, and he covered it up because blah-de, 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 blah. And it's kind of a total waste of time, and he's not a particularly interesting character in the novel. He's just kind of a greasy shitbag guy. But in this he's really interesting, because the actor doesn't go for the obvious thing. He doesn't play him as a nasty piece of work. The bit in the office where Kinderman is trying to explain what's happening to like the loudmouth hospital administrator, and he gets upset. And in that scene, Temple is he seems quite sympathetic. He actually says to him quietly, it's all right, go on, like that. And you get the feeling this isn't a fundamentally bad guy. This is a weak guy.
It doesn't do the sort of Hannibal Dr. Chilton thing.
No, exactly, yeah.
And again, something that this film very much anticipates as
very
well.
much, yeah. Silence of the Lambs will be along in a couple of years.
Yeah, and, you almost feel like it's going to say, and we will return. James Bond will return in Silence of the Lambs.
Not do it as well either. I don't rate that movie.
Yeah,
no, I
don't think it's aged well. There are, one of the biggest issues of the Silence of the Lambs, of course, is that dynamic between two serial killers, one of which is very interesting, one of which is not at all.
Well, let's talk about this another time, because I have all sorts of complex thoughts about Hannibal.
Beyond the way it tries to apologize for its own sort of like transphobic elements. Yeah. Jackie is not a real transsexual. Are they not? Are they not? That's interesting. Are they?
Really
not?
Is. It really is.
I always say that. I remember having a chat with our friend James Murphy, because we were talking about the various actors who've played Hannibal, and I say I always feel a little bit I feel a little bit for Anthony Hopkins, because I don't know whatever his intention was, but I'm sorry, if you turn up on the first day and you see that set and it's like, you want me to play like that,
right? Yeah.
You're stuck as an actor, because that set is ludicrous.
It is ludicrous, isn't it? It really is. Yeah.
What are we doing here?
I'm so sorry, but
symbolism with a class.
There is no one else who can play Hannibal now that Mads has played him. He is Hannibal, and
just to do a little bit of this. One of the interesting things about Hannibal is how he evolves. He changes from book to book. Like in the first book, which is Red Dragon, he is basically not all that different to how he ends up on screen in Manhunter. It's toned down a bit in the movie, with Brian Cox and etc. But it's basically not all that different. By the time you get to Silence of the Lambs, he's started to grow extra fingers, and he's got purple eyes and weird shit like this. And by the time you get to later novels,
Hannibal, bloody hell.
He's got a Japanese stepmother who was born in Hiroshima, etc.
No.
And
And there's an honest to God Batman training sequence where she's teaching him to be a samurai. It's like, oh my God!
I haven't seen the movie of Hannibal Rising, but I have read the novel.
It is Batman Begins. It's like, oh my God! What are you doing? Oh,
but I kind of like him more the more batshit crazy he gets, because again it gets more honest. It gets more honest about what it's doing. It's doing a serial killer supervillain, right?
That's
which it's always been doing, but it gets more honest about it, and he gets more semiotically interesting the more you start entwining him with Eastern Europe and places where the Holocaust happened and Hiroshima and things like that. And what I love about the Brian Fuller TV show is how totally it leans into that, to the point where it makes him kind of potentially a satanic demonic figure himself.
Just goes for it, and I love it. I love it. It eroticizes him. It makes it. Oh, and honestly, their relationship.
Well, he's
so
extraordinary. He's extraordinary casting, because he basically squares all these things that Hannibal on paper makes you think no actor can play that. And and one of the key things is that he just has this the very thing that Hannibal needs, which is all his accomplishments are unassuming.
Yeah,
and it's and it's so hard to pay, and it's just something that Mads Mikkelsen readily brings to it. It's like there's this accomplished dancer, this accomplished mover, this very, very interesting man with sexual charisma that he doesn't overplay, and everything's easy, but it's not boring.
Right.
It's an incredible performance, and yet I mean, I don't want to take anything from him, but a lot is coming from God. It's just sort of his makeup, and it's the combination of whoever cast that going, I've got it, and when I tell you who, you better give me an extra 20 grand because you're going to love me for the rest of the time. I mean, I've the inevitable problem I will always have with the actor who plays Will Graham in the Hannibal is that there's twofold. Number one, that he married Claire Danes, and I'll never forgive him for that. And I'd earmarked her age 12, and that's all I'm saying. And secondly,
I'm all team Mads, so it's fine.
Secondly, as someone who had to earn their bloody stripes and struggle to get into drama school and struggle for every bloody job in rep ever, he was discovered by an agent and the country's leading casting director serving coffee in a coffee bar, having not done a stitch of acting in his entire life.
Is that
basically
right?
Pretty much, yeah. And also,
wow.
I mean, it's a thankless role in many ways, Will Graham, because it's very hard to play, and it's like, you kind of do quite well in it as well. So I sort of just thoroughly hate him.
So it's annoying. It's annoying.
Terribly
bad.
It's terrible.
What's fascinating about Will Graham is that the novel that he appears in, Red Dragon, and the adaptations as well, they make this constant song and dance about the fact that he has this empathy disorder thing where he can think like a serial killer because basically he can think like anybody, or at least that's what I mean. Like Hannibal's contention is that Will basically is a serial killer, except that he doesn't quite manage to do the serial killing. And what the other thing, what Will's own interpretation and the interpretation of people more friendly to him is that he has this empathy thing where he can just, and the thing about in the novel, he literally never does it. He never puts himself into anybody else's mind. He never even does any profiling in the novel. Like the psychological profiling is done by other people.
Yeah. He's just an investigator in the novel. Yeah. It's not. I mean, he's a totally different character, really. I mean, he's a completely different character in the novel. In the novel, he's much more macho as well, isn't he? He's much more sort of, your action hero type character. He's gruff.
He's frankly much less interesting.
Less interesting. Yes.
Yeah.
For me, it's always going to be the romance. I mean, the introducing I don't even want to call it homoerotic because it's not that. It's operating on some other level completely. It's almost like psychosexual, isn't it? It's mind attracted to mind. But honestly, you've seen the ending of the show, right?
Oh yeah, it's perfect.
Oh,
oh my god!
I mean, I actually thought that was going to be the ending. I had no idea that it was a curtailed thing for a while. I think, well, that's kind of right.
I
That's
don't
fine.
want another season. Don't want another season. It's perfect. It's perfect. Leave it alone. Leave it alone.
Well, this is one of the things where
that line when he says, "This is all I ever wanted for us, Will," I fell off my chair. I actually fell off my chair. I was like, oh.
I love that
deeply
third season
about
as well.
this. Because one of my favorite things is an ending where it really works and it's satisfying and it's complete and it just leaves you're sitting back in your chair going, that's it, done, it's over, it's finished, everything done, everything tied up, everything perfect. But at the same time, I desperately wish there was more of that show because I love it so much.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There is a really difficult tension, isn't there? But the thing is, if they do reintroduce it, I doubt Will be in it. I think they'll try to switch it over to the whole Clarice Starling thing, and I don't want it.
How do you do the Silence of the Lambs now? Elle Sandifer and I had this discussion back in the day when it ended, and we weren't sure if it actually was going to come back. And of course, if it came back, the next one was going to be the Silence of the Lambs, with Buffalo Bill and all that. And how do you do that?
Right? Yeah.
We did Elle and I did an entire podcast where we talked to each other for like 3 hours trying to puzzle this one out.
Yeah. It's almost impossible, and I just don't want it. At a purely personal level, I think their romance is perfect. It's one of the best same-sex romances I've ever seen in this kind of fiction, and I think the decision to actually make it literal rather than just like the metaphor it was, brilliant.
Don't be cowards.
They actually went for it. They went for it. And it's consummated in I love the fact. I mean, this is really dark and dangerous, but I love the fact that their romance is consummated in violence. It's this intimate violence. It's like, wow. It's like beyond sex. It's beyond it's amazing. And I love the fact the show goes there. It goes. It's wow.
The show's fantastic. I mean,
I have to
The Exorcist got turned into a TV show as well.
Yes, it did. Yes,
and it's rotten. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. It's a real demonstration of the fact that there is much more potential in the stories of Thomas Harris than Thomas Harris ever minds, and it takes a Brian Fuller et al. To come along and really bring it out. And I kind of feel I feel kind of like you could I kind of feel sad that the Exorcist TV show has already been done because I feel like it needs the same treatment. Somebody needs to come in without, frankly, the blinkers of Blatty's ideology. To come
There's
in and
real potential. It could work, couldn't it? It could be beautiful.
Kind of what almost happened with number 2, except that number 2 turned out to be such an almighty fucking mess.
but even in Legion, there's at least a sense of the scale opening to what it perhaps should be.
Yeah.
Certainly in the closing moments. And again, we've talked about this. The limitations of the first film is the where's the sense of scale? Where's the sense of cosmic Gotterdammerung here? Where's the it doesn't feel like a Twilight of the Gods. It's also petty.
Where's even the basic questioning? That's what I never get from the original film. It tries to throw things in there, like you've got Karis being like a lapsed Catholic, but it doesn't last very long, and it doesn't really mean anything in the end.
Yes, it doesn't connect up. But it just made me think about one of the great things where I think, as Jack rightly says, it works better.
It's just a wobble, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a wobble. Yeah.
And the whole thing is that this battle that is fought over the soul, or at least the body, of this completely innocent girl who's just a pawn in the game. It's all about making sure that this guy comes back to the church before he dies.
Yes, pretty much it. Yeah,
which is pretty fucking icky.
That's it.
Let's be honest.
It is. It is,
and all those elongated sequences with him visiting his mother and stuff, and it's like, oh, well, I see what you're doing now. Okay, that's not really what we signed up for. It's but the one of the things I did, again, it's one of those elements that I think that Blatty, again, he he heads towards something and either forgets about it or it just slips away. But
Yeah.
I was really kind of impressed in the early stages of the film how the steps are treated as almost a kind of entity in themselves.
Yeah, now that's wonderful. I really like that.
And the fact that he credit to him, not at this point a terribly experienced director. I don't know who he had on hand as a cinematographer, but a real sense of they are a character.
Yeah, there's a sense of moment about them. I mean, they're actually on. I mean, do you remember the old VHS cover? They are the cover. It's completely black, and you have the steps, and there's a figure at the top of them.
Yeah.
In the Blu-ray set I bought, it's got like a double cover. It's got new artwork when you buy it, like a new painting of elements from the film, etc. But when you open it up on the inside through the clear plastic, you can see the original movie artwork, which is just the steps with George C. Scott at the top. And and of course I turned the cover around so that the correct one is on.
Yeah, totally.
What's interesting about George C. Scott in relation to all this as well is that I don't quite know what how easy or how difficult he was finding it as he was getting older, and it was very much seen as an actor of associated with films from a bygone time. Really, I mean, he'd done The Changeling as well, but he really was invested in Blatty's original script. It wasn't just oh Christ, I better do this because I'm 60 something and no one's going to put me in a leading role. No, there was he really properly gunned for it, and Dourif says that he was incredibly serious about what he felt was more than just a horror movie, that there were gaps in there where he said were incredibly vital and just very interesting. I mean, he's no longer with us, so it's difficult to say, but I'd almost love to follow up interview with him. So what was it that what were you seeing? What were you?
Yeah, what compelled you in this?
Yeah, because obviously this was, he really wanted to do this movie.
Well, he clearly had a penchant for this subject matter, didn't he? I mean, like the Changeling, obviously, and now this. But he also brings always an incredible quiet intensity to what he does.
He strikes me as one of those actors who always had a hunger to do something very important, and to have lead roles that were consequential, and kind of got sorted into character roles against their will, And I think he would jump. I mean, I don't really know, but that's my sense of him, that he would jump at anything like this that had, as he saw it, some heft to it, where he got to be the linchpin of it.
Yeah, he really leaps on, as an actor, he leaps on anything to do with hands in this. Hands are obviously something that the thing keeps coming back to. But what he does with his own, just acting with his hands, everything is very careful. And, he puts in some deliberate, there's a wonderful scene, I think it's when the first priest is killed. And he sort of forgets himself. It's beautifully done, and he sort of forgets himself, and he puts his hand near his face, and he reacts to it, and he can't remember if it's the hand he's touched the body with or not. And it's just a little moment, and the editor holds it. So obviously the editor seems to go, "Oh, I'm actually going to keep it," because it's actually held longer than the shot should be held, and it's not overdone. It's just a little tiny delicate moment, and I'm watching it go out. You're so careful over these kinds of things. You're really thinking about this. Really, really. Again, impressed in the fact I think he even manages more things in this than in The Changeling, or he has a very sympathetic editor this time round. I think the editor's quite fascinated by him because shots with him are held after
they are they? And as Jack was saying earlier, the camera kind of like gets right up close to him. It really gets into the crags and pores of his face, and it just holds there.
Yeah. Blatty's really interested in faces. I think he casts people, I think, for interesting faces, and he gets up close into them, which Peter Medak doesn't do that in The Changeling. Peter Medak's more in accordance with the style of his time at the time that movie is made. It's more pulled back.
Yeah.
Well, it's the distorted the distorted wide shot, isn't it? To make you feel disorientated and that something in that preternatural is happening in what is in other wise framed as naturalistic. But yes, very different. They're in absolute contrast with each other in that respect, aren't they, in terms of cinematography?
On the subject of another thing this film is fascinated with, in hands, certainly faces and heads. There's lots of stuff. Heads being swapped back and forth.
Yeah.
And can I just mention the quite astonishing sequence where it's one of those things in this film where it really doesn't quite work. Like, it just smacks of an inexperienced director who's very enthusiastic doing something that just doesn't quite work, and yet at the same time the fact that it doesn't work is really genuinely unnerving. The thing with the statue in the seminary, that incredibly eerie sequence where he's in the seminary talking to the senior priest, and suddenly there's like some sort of visitation, and the older man doesn't react to it, almost like this sort of thing is just routine around here. Every now and again you get a visitation,
right?
And you get this whispering voice from the other room, and papers sort of ruffle, and a door opens, and things like this. And Scott follows something out into this building where it's completely deserted and the lights go out, and earlier you've seen him walk in past a statue. I believe it's actually a statue of Ignatius Loyola. I'm not entirely sure. Founder of the Jesuit order.
Interesting.
And then later on, you in this sequence I'm talking about, you see him walk along a corridor in long shot, and in the foreground that same statue is there, except that it's got this grotesque grit. It looks like the Joker.
Oh yes, it looks like the Joker. Yeah.
It really does look like the Joker in the comic books. And he's this grotesque, distorted, grinning, evil clown face, and instead of holding a cross, it's holding a knife all of a sudden. Just
but
there.
These things are dropped in, and again, it's a curious thing, because when I was watching it, I was thinking, my God, this is.
Really made me jump this time
the absurd,
round.
But in other respects, there's something so operatic about the movie that it holds together with these very bold choices where you think that could have absolutely sunk it in that moment, and yet for some reason I guess because it's so committed to them.
Yeah, and it's so committed to the world that it draws as well. This is a world where there are demons and there are miracles and exorcisms and magic and whatnot.
It is slightly jarring that it looks so much like the comic book version of the Joker, but it is well done as a scary, leering, glaring face. It really is genuinely, like, I'd forgotten about it. Lots of images from this had really stuck in my head from my first time watching it. For some reason, I'd forgotten this, and when it just pops up there on screen, just cut, and there it is. It really just, Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I'm really pleased about with Legion as well is that it has had a sort of a kind of resurrection, I suppose, in recent years. People, particularly in horror communities, it's one of those films that has gotten around by word of mouth, and now people really do extol its virtues, which is lovely to see.
Even even if it's reductive in the sense of it is now considered to be, the film with the one of the greatest jump scares of all time.
Which,
but at least that's a way in. At least that's getting people to watch it.
Yeah. And it is, as jump scares go, it's really good.
It's a banger. It really is. Yeah.
I just love the whoever's under the sheet. It might be Durif, I don't know. But whoever's under the sheet, and whether it's Blatty's direction or the actor's intent, it's just absolute determination. It's just, I've got to take this person's head off. There's no creeping about. Nothing ruins it. It's just, off I go. It's so direct. And I think it's also that which throws the viewer.
It's the timing as well. Casual. I mean, like, it's timing.
Just a determined, right, I've got to do this thing. And because we don't really know, we have the explanation for that surgical implement later. There's something. What the hell is that?
What is going on? Right? Yeah. What is happening? And the fact that there is the fact that the timing of the scene is played with, so they're not even going to go for a normally timed jump scare, or even just an elongated jump scare. They are actually going to invert time all over the place. Like the nurse has only just come out of that room when she turns away.
You think you've had the jump scare because she goes into the room and finds the ice cracking, and then the guy pops up and scares her. You think, that's the jump scare.
They ratchet it up. But even just the sheet covering
what you get is
it's
a loot
almost
and bust followed by an actual jump scare.
Yeah. It's almost like with the sheet has a number of connotations, but it's almost in the moment you start to. It's like you're terrified and you jump, but you also start to giggle, which almost makes it worse because there's almost something a bit Scooby-Doo about it. But that then makes it even more unsettling. It's like, oh God,
but it's very, it's a thing. It's Blatty's obviously quite literate in uncanny literature because this thing, the white figure in the distance, this is a thing. This is in M.R. James.
I was going to say this is
A Whistle and I'll Come to You.
Yeah.
It pops up repeatedly in Stephen King.
Yeah.
There are, I can't think of them now, but there are lots of other instances. There is just something about a white figure in the distance that obviously it taps into something inside us because it keeps on popping up in uncanny literature.
But totally. the I think the other sort of genius point of it as well is that it is, I think it comes back to the point you said where it's just at the moment you relax, because that shot is held for so long, and it's an unusual shot. I mean, we don't see things play out. We haven't seen things play out in the rest of the film in quite this kind of shot, this sort of long shot situation. It has, as we've been saying, all up in close, and then it's, well, where are we going with this? Where are we going with this? Where are we going? Oh Jesus! And it's there's a sleight of hand as well, because actually what the camera does just at the last moment, it does a rise and almost like a faux crash zoom. It doesn't go for the full crash zoom, which would have been tacky. It sort of does this kind of half crash zoom, and again, so the vocabulary of what you expect is all out of kilter as well, because you expect an absolute crash in, and so it's
like the figure is out of view before the camera can catch up with it.
Yes,
which mirrors our own experience, because we said, "Oh, what's that? Where'd it go?" It's like,
everything falls into place later, but you're not sure you can trust everything that's fallen into place.
Right,
and it's also the first. It's not quite an act of violence, because again, we don't see any violence, but it's the first thing we've seen that even approaches an act of violence.
Yeah,
but because it's mixed with, with sort of, because these things are so embedded in us, because we even if we are not religious itself, we are brought up within a religiosity, where it's so strongly embedded, that sudden cut to the decapitated statue, and with the cord and the choral chord, it's so good at tapping into.
Yeah, it's evoking a lot
everything
of
it needs to,
isn't it? Yeah, it's very clever,
and you feel a bit sick. It's a physical thing. But as soon as the cuts to the statue, which they're on all its marble and alabaster or whatever, and you're like, oh God.
It's very clever.
Oh God.
And obviously it wouldn't have worked as well if it had just carried on with its literalism. If you'd have seen a decapitation or whatever, it just wouldn't have worked as well.
But even the later on with in the domestic environment, there's something so strange about that reverse shot and the grand. I mean, it's comical and yet macabre, I love and because it's one of those wonderful things where, because they can't pull that scene, they could now, but because they couldn't pull that scene, so you've got a combination of reversing film, and then this cut to this hand coming in, and the expression on the face of the daughter. But then it takes on its own kind of art in a way.
You're right. Yes, it becomes uncanny, doesn't it?
There is something about.
Interesting.
There is just something about the texture of that
looking
shot.
At it. Your desire is to keep looking at it. It's like one of those things where you want to slow down. It's almost like I mentioned earlier about Spielberg and Jaws, and it's always the point.
Every time I watch this, when you get to these particular moments, the woman crawling on the ceiling and the thing with the scissors around Julie's neck and the figure in the hallway, I want to pause it and rewind and watch it again and freeze frame. And every time I have to stop myself doing it because I know I should.
But it's the same situation that I try to explain to people about. The worst thing that we mentioned Jaws earlier. The worst thing that happened to Jaws is to remake it with. It is the damn fakeness of the thing, and that is part of what's unsettling. And it's the same with the shot of Julie. It's like, this doesn't quite work, but it's not working is actually kind of terrifying.
It does, yeah. There is something to be said for imperfection in certainly in horror. It excites this kind of strange, uncanny reaction in the audience. They know that something is wrong, and it feeds into this sense of wrongness. And it works really well, and I wish more directors would take that on board. To be perfectly honest,
I mentioned this in an earlier. It's exactly the same as the I think silly decision with the re-release of The Exorcist at the end. The thing that makes it work at the end is the jump cut between Jason Miller and Jason Miller in makeup. Yeah, and when they perfectly mesh it together with a little bit of CGI, and I think, no, you've killed it now. It's that jump cut that is vital.
Because it's the same with the Pazuzu face. They elongate the sequences with the Pazuzu face, so you see it more. It works so much better when it's just that almost subliminal flash.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, have I seen what I think I've just seen? Yeah.
There was do you remember like the early 2000s for horror? There was this really horrible thing that happened in mainstream horror cinema where it became very slick. Everything became very produced and very precise. And though when you go back and watch mainstream horror from that era, the vast majority of it is just frictionless. There's nothing tangible about it. For me, I really like horror that does have that feeling of dirt about it, something that's been scraped and cobbled together. It lends it texture. It lends it it's feeling.
It's the materiality of it, I think, ultimately. Like the shot of Julie nearly getting her head cut off with the giant shears. You can see that there's something not right about it. It's obviously been filmed it's been filmed very slowly and then sped up or something. Something's not quite right about it. But that, in a funny way, as you've been saying, that actually makes it somehow more effective. And it's like, I mean, the shark in Jaws, to me, that kind of has the unconvincingness of real life, because I don't know, I've seen real thing, I've seen a real jellyfish on the beach, and it didn't look convincing in the way that a CGI jellyfish does. It looks like something somebody slapped together out of
like plastic bags and things.
Reality doesn't always have this convincingness that slick effects do, and this ties in with something we've talked about many times in this series, which is reality as media presents it to you as an ideology. It's not so, but it's the material. You can see that something real is happening in that shot, even if you can see it's been manipulated in some way. You can see that something real is happening, whereas now you get it done with CGI and it'd be pitch perfect, but you would know that you were watching something that wasn't really there. And I think actually that kind of ties back to something that we didn't quite get to talk about when we talked about Berberian Sound Studio, which is to do with, the appeal of analog. And the appeal of analog, I think, is just to do with its intense materiality. We know we are listening to something that is, the sounds just have this materiality to them because they are fundamentally coming from something which is hard and flexible and plastic and touchable. You can hold it, you can feel it, etc., which isn't true of digital.
Right, you're also hearing the imperfections of the medium, aren't you? Which makes it real.
What you are ultimately getting in that, the charge of that, the charge of the visible, practical effect shot that is an effect shot, but it's still good because it's been well done, and of the analog audio, it might not be as good as what you can do now with digital sound effects, but it's still better because you can feel that it's analog. The charge there is that you can still feel human labor involved in it.
Yes.
In exactly the same way that Dada emphasized the human labor that went into creating art, because it stuck things to canvases, Right. It emphasized the fact that the things that surround us in the world are produced. They are produced by humans at a moment in time when mass production was coming in, and commodities, the things that were surrounding us everywhere, were losing that. They were gaining this sort of seamless, mass-produced immateriality in a strange way, because they're losing that contact with direct human labor because they're all being made by machine. It's the same sort of thing, I think.
And I think it's one of the things that muddies the waters with regards to commodity fetishism, because at the same time that, commodity fetishism as a concept, absolutely. But at the same time, there is also something about, as you say, the tangibility of human labor. Even the digitalization of things. I mean, the obvious one, I think, there's more and more moving on to streaming. There's more and more music in clouds and so on. And yet the desire to have something in your hands is still very hard to break. And it's whether, how much of that is rooted in that sense of touching something that has been labored over, or how much of it is embedded in commodity fetishism. It's very difficult. One might say it was dialectical, but it's tricky. It's a conundrum. It's a hard one to quite work through. But
in a society of generalized commodity production, commodity fetishism is how we express that feeling of wanting to hold things not material.
We can't help it. It's
that is the problem. That it takes that urge and it turns it into a form of fetish.
Yes,
right.
I always think the interesting thing to get to with this sort of text is not so much what the author thinks it's about, but what it's really about. Yeah. The author's thoughts here are very, they're interesting, obviously, but I think it's far more interesting to ponder why he chose to express them in this particular way. I mean, why tell this story about like old people as empty vessels who can be turned essentially into weapons,
right?
I think the original Exorcist is about a very young person who is essentially the same thing is done to them, isn't it?
Yeah.
There seems to be something in Blatty's approach to age where he seems to find. I mean, this film is about, it's not just sort of a straightforward fear of old people, because this film is essentially about a couple of old buffers who are friends. Right. And it's very sympathetic to, it's about a couple of old men. It's very sympathetic.
Yeah. Very unusual in that regard.
Very unusual and very welcome, actually, the way it humanizes and treats older people with respect, and also demonstrates the way in which society at large doesn't always do that, because you get sort of, Kinderman's colleagues kind of look down on him slightly when he's not looking because he's this old chap, and the nurses aren't always respectful, etc., etc. But there are several scenes where Kinderman walks among the people in the geriatric ward and kind of looks at them with this very telling, horror on his face, to be honest with you, where
he's close to it, isn't he? He realizes he's closer to it.
It makes a point of showing that he's kind. He's kind to the lady that comes up to him and says, "Are you my son?"
It's such a sweet scene. That is.
Oh, that is lovely, isn't it?
Yeah,
and he plays it so beautifully. It's
But at the same time, there is this real feeling of unease. There is this feeling of the flesh is so frail.
Yeah,
and we're all headed in this direction. We are the universe is just this thing that, I mean, he says, doesn't he? The life is a serial killer. It kills us all. Well,
maybe that's kind of what Blatty is almost like subconsciously getting at with his metaphysics. There's almost like a C.S. Lewis thing going on here. At least, even if there is something as terrible as the demon Pazuzu, there is something. There is something beyond this.
The real problem for Blatty, I think, underneath it all, is just that we're so fragile and we're all destined to be chewed up. We are all the carp in the bath. We are all destined to be killed and consumed. And we have this brief moment where we get to swim around and be purified of our toxins.
And we know that we're locked into an almost basic contradiction, in that as much as we try to live from moment to moment, we can't, because we are a creature that is always becoming. We can't help but think narratologically about our own life. It's very hard to just say, well, I'll choose to exist in the 24 hours I'm in. It's not possible. We're always thinking about what are we foreshadowing in our own lives, or what's the collection of information that comes, and it's probably one of the most in a way terrifying things about the human condition, is that you're not aware of what your history is until it's happening, but you cannot stay locked in the ever present. You just can't do it. Your consciousness doesn't work that way.
No, and it's very both this and the original Exorcist are very concentrated on humans in moments of intense transition, which are inextricably linked to their bodies. I mean, the original one is about a 12-year-old girl. I mean, that's there couldn't
on the cusp
be a more
of puberty.
Exactly.
It's not
there couldn't be a more on the nose. Yeah, no. And, you could say, well, it's about a 12-year-old girl because he's telling a story about exorcisms, and exorcisms tend to feature children on the brink of puberty. But then he chose to tell a story about an exorcism, didn't he?
Right. And you have to ask why, don't you?
Yeah.
Why do exorcism stories and possession stories focus primarily on prepubescent girls?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
And that gets into a huge
absolutely
which
massive.
we can't have now because we've already been talking for nearly 2.25 hours.
That's a whole other thing. I mean, that's like that is just a huge subject.
But I think Exorcist 3 Legion, very good film. Probably the most uneven and flawed movie of all the ones we've talked about so far.
Yeah.
But certainly, I think a lot of fun. Certainly, the theatrical version, much more fun with its surrealism and its throwing everything at the wall, etc. I think a very interesting film.
Yeah, a very interesting film. I think it's one of those. There's a great film in the cracks. But actually, the cracks are quite big, and you do see it working. And it's and the things that go against it, they have a strange sort of charm.
Yes, absolutely. Well. I mean, it's a flawed piece. There's no doubt. It's probably the most.
You don't want to take the flaws away. In a sense.
It is the most flawed of everything we've talked about thus far in this series, and yet it's also very, very compelling.
It's a great case for the. I mean, I don't want to use the term bad because it's not a bad movie. In many respects, it's a very, very strong movie. But it is a case for the quality bad movie, not the good bad movie. That's something else. The good bad movie is almost a guilty pleasure. I don't mean in terms of guilty pleasure. It's the quality trash.
There's also such a thing as the bad good movie as well.
Well,
which
absolutely,
is
yeah.
The movie where
maybe we're somewhere
right,
in between those things.
all the performances and everything, and the direction's fine, and the music's great, and the performances are good, and the script never puts a foot wrong, and you get to the end of it, and you can't really see any big problems, but you get to the end of it, and you just think
sort of like
that doesn't work.
Well, that's The Exorcist, isn't it?
That's not a bad. Yeah, that's approaching what I mean. Yeah,
because kind of like. It's just joyous to be able to talk about this one now, and to be able to talk about it in this way, because there was a time when it would have just been disregarded. It would have been in like the bargain bin in an old VHS store somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And the title isn't helping it. But again, I can quite understand why the studio had gone, okay, you need this because
Blatty so didn't want it to be called Exorcist 3. He was so.
He was fighting for that.
Could you call it Exorcist 2? I think was his last moment, was it, because he knew they weren't going to just get away with just Legion, and he went, okay, if it's going to be called The Exorcist, can it be called The Exorcist 2, please?
You kind of understand that. I mean, if there was a time, if you saw the number 3 in a series on the front of a horror VHS or DVD, you'd be like, no. Just disregard it automatically.
It's just something about anything 3, isn't
there?
It's
really is.
Just this instant.
There really is, especially with popular horror franchises from that era. You can just keep reeling them off, can't you? The ones that were ruined by their third installments, Hellraiser. It just goes on and on and on. Where the third installments profoundly missed the point of what made the previous films interesting.
There's just something about like doing the same thing a third time that just instantly fills you with suspicion. I just think it's like, how can there be any need to do it not just again but again? Right. Whatever it is, can you really need another one?
And funnily enough, because a couple months ago I did the podcast of Human Bondage with about the Bondage, and Goldfinger, which is the third film. I feel like I'm on a different planet, because of course that film is the third, which is, I think, still the most, certainly up until perhaps the Craig era, then but there's some dispute, but certainly of the classic Bonds is considered the definitive, the great, the masterpiece. And it's like, well, I've seen it, and it's fucking awful.
Yeah.
Why am I on a different planet to everyone else when it comes to Goldfinger? It's like, the one before, From Russia with Love, I'll make a case for From Russia with Love. That's a cracking little movie. But Goldfinger? But let's not disappear down that rabbit hole.
I'd be interested to go back to the original reactions actually and see how people at the time responded to it. Was it like when it was released, all the papers were like, "Oh, they finally got Bond right. This is great," unlike the previous two, or were they just like, "Oh, it's the same thing again"?
Yeah.
I bet they were. I bet the reviews were all, "Oh, it's getting tired now. It's just the same
the contemporaneous reviews. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just how we've projected this back through that fetishism, of which Bond movies are immensely fetishized.
Goldfinger turned into the template from which
for
all the
everything
others.
that followed. Yeah,
I was going to say that is like the archetype, isn't it now?
Yeah.
But my God,
really all it is.
If you can get through it without nodding off, is a start.
That's pretty much any Bond for me. It just doesn't do it for me. Does not do it for me.
It is the classic example of that these films, they can only really withstand being 90 minutes, so therefore they're all 2.5 hours.
This happens to me over and over again, but I swear it's not just me being contrarian. What's the one Bond film that all Bond fans admit is bad? Quantum of Solace. What do you think is my favourite Bond film by fucking mile?
Quantum of Solace, among many other things, other than, I'm on board with you here. One of the great selling points of it is short. It's like about an hour and 45 minutes.
That's it. It doesn't outstay its welcome.
So by
on Earth, you need 2 hours of a Bond film, let alone 2 hours and a half.
2 hours of a Bond film is a short Bond film. It's like 2.5. The last one is like 3.5. It's like, what? How are we doing this? Oh God, I've properly railroaded it. I'm sorry. We'll edit this.
Well, it's a good railroad.